I've spoken before on open worlds in general, particularly the importance of what we call empty space. It yields scale, exploration, and eventually, discovery. If you haven't seen that video, I'd recommend going and watching that one first, because in this video, I'll probably be alluding to a few things from that one. But what I want to talk about today is specifically the application of open worlds into Japanese RPGs, sometimes whether they like it or not. I'm John Reardon, you're watching NWR TV, and this is a Game Design Rant. Western RPGs have, for a long time, embraced the open-ended gameplay afforded by open worlds. Their roots in tabletop games like Dungeons & Dragons perhaps influenced this focus on freedom and customization of not only the player character, but the world around them. Traditional Japanese RPGs, on the other hand, have focused much more diligently on linear story-focused adventures. While they oftentimes still present a world to explore, the player is generally guided very specifically from one story point to the next. Gradually, however, the separation between Western RPGs and Japanese RPGs has begun to disappear. With this has come the introduction of open worlds to franchises that, until now, have been linear. With the recent release of Final Fantasy XV on PS4 and Xbox One, I couldn't help but draw comparisons between it and the Wii U's own JRPG epic, Xenoblade Chronicles X. Right off the bat, it's easy to spot similarities between these two large-scale JRPGs, right down to the visual design of their worlds. It is clear that to a certain extent, both these games sought to provide players with a similar gaming experience, but their methods for doing so are anything but similar. Interestingly, both the Final Fantasy series and the Xenos series began as, well, the same series. The first title in the Xenos series, Xenogears, was originally pitched as the plot for Final Fantasy VII, but eventually grew into its own game. When it became clear that Squaresoft had little interest in furthering the Xenos series, the game's director broke off and formed his own company, Monolith Soft, in 1999. From there, the Final Fantasy and Xenos series would continue to develop, almost as alternate reality versions of each other, with the Xenos series operating quietly in the shadow of its big brother Final Fantasy. In 2007, Monolith became a subsidiary of Nintendo, and the Xenos series went from being an often ignored masterpiece to a staple IP in the Nintendo library with the release of Xenoblade Chronicles and Xenoblade Chronicles X. With these new entries, the series has converted from a traditional turn-based JRPG to an open-world action JRPG. Similarly, with Final Fantasy XV, Square Enix has also made the jump away from turn-based linear storytelling and into the big wide world of open exploration. So now that we know how these sibling games arrived here, let's look at what they do with the open world set before them. Both games actually open quite similarly, with the player almost immediately being greeted with a wide, open world to explore. Both games give the player a general objective to accomplish, but leave them free to explore all they want before completing said objective. In Xenoblade, if you want to sprint to the other end of the map, you can. If you want to do it in your underwear, you can. Granted, you'll likely get killed along the way, but hey, it's an open world and that choice is up to you. In Final Fantasy XV, you get this exact same feeling. I can go anywhere I want, though granted, you do have to keep your clothes on. That is until you actually try it. Exploring, not keeping your clothes on. Something I noticed immediately upon exploring in Final Fantasy XV is that there are invisible walls everywhere. See that rock? You can jump over that, right? No, because the area beyond that rock isn't actually explorable. The area beyond that river isn't actually explorable. The area beyond that fence isn't actually explorable. The area beyond that tree isn't actually explorable. Final Fantasy doesn't provide the player with an open world, but rather an open road. What's beyond the road is explorable only when the game feels like it. The game does occasionally drop you into one of the few wide open explorable areas, and for a moment, the world feels huge again. Looking at these giant dinosaurs drinking from this lake once again brings Final Fantasy XV into close comparison with Xenoblade Chronicles X. But even here, we quickly become aware that this world isn't actually open. Where in Xenoblade I can swim right up to that dinosaur, if I try to do the same in Final Fantasy, my character just walks up to the edge of the shore and stops. And when we go to leave this explorable area, guess what happens? The topography bottlenecks us back onto a road, and the area immediately past that bottleneck isn't explorable anymore. In order to get to the next explorable area, the game makes us watch as our AI-controlled friend drives a car in real time through a world we can't explore. This can go on anywhere from 5 to as long as 10 minutes. I have nothing to do right now. The game won't allow me to fast travel, so I have no choice but to watch this happen. 10 years of development, and at no point during any of that did anyone actually bother to try playing the game. Remarkable. Remarkable. When the game seemingly randomly offers you fast travel, it costs money. Not a lot of money. In fact, it's a meaningless amount of money, but it's just enough to make you feel like the game doesn't want you to fast travel. It wants you to have the experience of a road trip. It wants you to fully grasp the scale of the world you're in, and guess what? That's great. In my previous game design rant, I talked about how games like Xenoblade Chronicles X force the player to cover incredible distances in order to hammer into them the incredible scale of the world. Final Fantasy XV does this same thing, but with one crucial difference. You don't get to explore along the way. You just watch as the world drifts by you. Nothing happens. Your characters rarely talk, and you're never in any danger. When you try to drive at night, Ignis will stop you and say that you should wait until morning because there are demons out at night. But guess what? Even if you do drive at night, odds are nothing will happen. While recording this, it took me driving back and forth for about 10 minutes before I finally came up against an enemy that stopped me in the middle of the road. And even then, he was like a level 17 bad guy, and it took me no time to kill him, and it wasn't actually a problem. In Xenoblade Chronicles X, you'll constantly encounter enemies, treasure, hidden areas, and side quests along your way across the open world. In Final Fantasy XV, the exploration serves as a glorified loading screen for the next important event. Now, the point of this video is not to bash on Final Fantasy XV, but rather to look at the application of an open world into these two distinguished JRPG franchises. What became clear to me after playing through both of these games is that one of them was designed for an open world, and the other simply in order to compete. From beginning to end, Xenoblade Chronicles X remains an open-world adventure. Final Fantasy XV, on the other hand, drops its open world about halfway through in favor of linear storytelling, and from that point on, the game is fantastic. It's clear that the game was never really built with that open world in mind. Where Xenoblade Chronicles X uses its open world to weave a complex and expansive narrative, Final Fantasy XV's extremely personal narrative can only truly be appreciated once it sheds its open world. No doubt Final Fantasy XV's troubled, decade-long development is largely to blame for this convoluted assortment of design philosophies. On the one hand, you have developers who want to push Final Fantasy into the modern era and appeal to a new set of gamers. Yet, on the other hand, you have a large core audience who they doubtless feel obliged to appease, and rightfully so. But now let's look at Xenoblade Chronicles X. How was the Xeno series able to transition from the exact same roots into an open-world action RPG so seemingly easily? I believe a few factors were at play. The fan base for the Xenos series had never been anywhere near as large as Final Fantasy. Additionally, Monolith Soft's purchase by Nintendo moved them away from their PlayStation-based audience. No doubt there was a prevailing air of re-establishing the series to an almost entirely new audience. Because of this, the Xenos series was able to entirely commit to an open-world playstyle where Final Fantasy is held back by series conventions. Where Xenoblade has used this to offer its players unbounded freedom, Final Fantasy was limited to offering the illusion of freedom, or at best, temporary freedom. Undeniably, they both present us with jaw-dropping worlds. They both present us with unique new takes on converting turn-based combat into real-time combat. In fact, to be honest, I'd be fascinated to see what Monolith Soft could do with a combat system more in the style of Final Fantasy XV. But beyond all of that, we are left with sibling franchises that have grown into two very different things. Where an open-world action RPG turned out to be a natural evolution for the Xeno franchise that has reinvigorated the series, the same genre limits the complex personal narratives of the Final Fantasy franchise. In other words, just because a series can be open world doesn't necessarily mean that it should. While I'm sure that Square Enix could make a fantastic open world Final Fantasy by fixing the issues present in 15, I question whether the results would still feel like Final Fantasy. For a long time, the Final Fantasy series and Xeno series have quietly operated in tandem, but to me it seems that what has benefited one is merely holding the other back. So what do you do with Final Fantasy? Obviously, doing the same thing over and over again is no better than trying to force it into a genre that doesn't work for its storytelling. To answer that, I want to look at another Nintendo game that, once again, has strong ties to Final Fantasy. The Last Story was developed by Hironobu Sakaguchi, the original creator of Final Fantasy. It was made for the Nintendo Wii back in 2011, though we didn't see it in Western territories until 2012. It presented a story-focused JRPG with a unique combat system and party customization, but beyond its linear story progression were a multitude of side quests taking the player to a plethora of new and previously explored locations. As such, it employed many of the best elements of open-world games without harming the narrative structure of traditional JRPGs. It showed that there's plenty of room for innovation within the genre. The Last Story felt like Sakaguchi making a statement directly to the Final Fantasy team, showing them what could be done to improve the genre, rather than trying to force Final Fantasy to be something it's not. What do you think? Maybe you love Final Fantasy 15, maybe you hate Xenoblade Chronicles X, maybe you like them both, maybe you hate them both. Maybe I totally missed the point of either of their open worlds. Whatever the case, let me know in the comments down below, and if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and maybe subscribe to Nintendo World Report TV because we do stuff like this all the time. If you really enjoy our content here, you can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/NWR and consider supporting us there. You can also check out NintendoWorldReport.com for tons more great Nintendo-centric content. Once again, my name is John Reardon, and I will see you next time. Bye.